The rain fell in relentless sheets across the border territories, turning the unpaved roads into rivers of mud and making the journey to the royal palace treacherous. Arya pressed her face against the cold window of the armored transport, watching the landscape shift from the humble villages she called home to the imposing stone fortresses that mark the inner kingdoms. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the worn leather bag containing her medical supplies, the only possessions she had been allowed to bring. The royal guards had arrived at the charity hospital 3 days ago, with a summons she could not refuse. The Alpha King was dying, and somehow, impossibly, they believed she could save him. Arya had laughed at first, thinking it was some cruel joke. She was nobody, just an Omega nurse who worked double shifts to afford her tiny apartment above the bakery. She had no connections, no special training beyond what she had learned through years of caring for the sick and injured in the poorest districts. But the guards had been deadly serious, and the head physician who accompanied them had explained with barely concealed desperation that every healer in the kingdom had failed. The king's condition was beyond conventional medicine, beyond even the most powerful healing magic their court possessed. They needed someone different, someone whose gift operated on a frequency they did not understand. They needed her. The palace emerged from the mist like a monument to power and intimidation, its obsidian towers piercing the storm clouds, its walls etched with ancient runes that pulsed with protective magic. Arya felt her wolf stir uneasily inside her, whimpering at the overwhelming dominance that radiated from every stone. This was the seat of Alpha King Cale Thornwood, the most feared ruler in 5 generations, a man whose very name made hardened warriors flinch. He had united the warring packs through brutal conquest, crushed rebellions with merciless efficiency, and built a society where strength was the only currency that mattered. Omegas like Arya existed at the bottom of his carefully constructed hierarchy, barely afforded more rights than human servants, their voices silenced, their worth measured only by their ability to bear children for more powerful wolves. She had spent her entire life avoiding the attention of alphas, knowing that safety lay in invisibility. Now she was being delivered directly into the den of the cruelest alpha of them all. The guards escorted her through marble corridors, lined with portraits of stern-faced kings and conquered territories, their boots echoing against floors so polished she could see her reflection. Arya kept her eyes down, her wolf instinctively submissive in the face of such concentrated power, but her mind remained sharp and alert. She noticed everything: the tense whispers of palace staff, the unusual number of elite guards stationed at every intersection, the barely concealed panic in the eyes of the council members who rushed past. Whatever was happening to the king, it had the entire palace on the edge of collapse. They stopped outside massive doors, carved with images of wolves in battle, and the head physician, a silver-haired beta named Dr. Marcus, turned to face her with grave eyes. He explained in hushed tones that the king had been declining for months, his strength fading, his legendary healing factor failing him for the first time in his life. He had become increasingly volatile, lashing out at anyone who came near, refusing most treatment, and growing weaker by the day. The council feared civil war if he died without a clear successor, and there were already factions positioning themselves to seize power. Before you see the content that many have been waiting for, I'd love to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this story. Your support means everything. The doors opened, and Arya's breath caught in her throat. The royal chamber was vast and dark, heavy curtains blocking out what little daylight penetrated the storm. The air was thick with the scent of sickness and something else, something wild and dangerous that made her instincts scream at her to run. In the center of the room, on a bed that looked more like a throne, lay Alpha King Cale Thornwood, even weakened, even clearly suffering. He was the most terrifying and magnificent creature Arya had ever seen. He was massive, his frame filling the enormous bed, muscles defined even in illness, his skin covered in the scars of 1,000 battles. His hair was black as midnight, falling in tangled waves around a face that was both brutally handsome and cruel, all sharp angles and harsh lines. But it was his eyes that pinned her in place when they opened, pure molten gold that burned with fever and fury. eyes that assessed her in a single glance and found her utterly wanting. His voice, when he spoke, was a rasp of gravel and contempt. An omega. They send me an omega. His lips curled in disgust as his gaze raked over her, taking in her simple clothes, her small stature, her lowered eyes. I am dying, and the best my useless counsel can offer is a pathetic little omega who probably faints at the sight of blood. Get her out of my sight before I kill her myself for wasting my time. The words hit Arya like physical blows, each one designed to cut, to diminish, to remind her of her place. She felt her wolf curl in on itself, wounded by the rejection from such a powerful alpha. But something else stirred inside her, something she had kept carefully hidden her entire life. A flicker of defiance, a spark of anger that this man, this king who knew nothing about her, would dismiss her based solely on her designation. Dr. Marcus started to apologize, to pull her back toward the door, but Arya surprised herself by stepping forward instead. Your Majesty, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. I understand your frustration. I understand that you see me as beneath you, as worthless because I'm an omega, but I'm also the only person in this kingdom whose healing gift operates on the frequency needed to address what's killing you. You have a corruption in your life force, something that's feeding on your own power and turning it against you. Traditional healing can't touch it because it's woven into your very essence. But my gift works differently. I can see it. And I believe I can help you. If you would rather die than accept help from someone you consider inferior, that's your choice. But don't pretend it's because I'm not capable. It's because you're too proud to admit that an omega might save your life. The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Marcus had gone pale, clearly expecting the king to explode, to have her executed on the spot for such insolence. The guards had their hands on their weapons, waiting for the order, but Cale was staring at her, with something that might have been shock, as if no one had dared speak to him that way in decades, perhaps ever. Then his eyes narrowed dangerously, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. You dare, he whispered. And there was death in that whisper. You dare speak to me as if you have any right, as if your opinion matters, as if you are anything more than a weak, pathetic creature who exists only because I allow it. Come here, Omega. Let me show you exactly what happens to those who forget their place. Arya's rational mind screamed at her to apologize, to submit, to do whatever it took to survive, but that defiant spark had caught fire now, burning away years of conditioning and fear. She walked to his bedside, close enough to smell the sickness on him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his fevered skin. She met his golden eyes directly, something no Omega was ever supposed to do with an alpha of his rank. I'm here to heal you, not to bow to you, she said softly. If you want to die out of spite, that's your decision. But I won't apologize for offering to save your life, and I won't pretend to be less than I am just to make you comfortable. Now, do you want my help or not? For a long moment, Cale looked like he might actually kill her. His hand shot out with supernatural speed, wrapping around her throat, not squeezing but holding her in place, his strength evident even in his weakened state. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin, his eyes burning into hers. I could snap your neck before you took another breath, he growled. I could make you suffer in ways you cannot imagine. I have destroyed armies, conquered kingdoms, and broken the spirits of wolves far stronger than you. What makes you think you can stand here and challenge me? But even as he spoke, Arya felt it. A pull. A recognition that went soul deep. A connection that made her wolf surge to the surface with a desperate, confused cry. The mate bond, snapping into place. With the force of destiny itself, binding her to the cruelest man in the kingdom, to a king who would rather die than show weakness, to an alpha who despised everything she represented. The shock of it must have shown on her face because Cale's expression changed, his eyes widening as he felt it too. No, he said, and it sounded like a prayer and a curse. No, this is not possible. The moon goddess would not be so cruel. His hand fell away from her throat as if she had burned him, and he turned. his face away, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "Get out," he commanded, his voice raw. "All of you get out now. Leave me alone." Dr. Marcus tried to protest, tried to explain that the king needed immediate treatment, but Cale roared at them with enough force to shake the windows, and suddenly everyone was fleeing, leaving Arya alone with the dying king, who was apparently her fated mate. She should have left too. Every instinct told her to run, to escape while she still could, but her healer's heart wouldn't let her abandon a patient, even one who hated her, and something deeper, something connected to that new bond, kept her rooted in place. She could feel his pain now, the sickness eating away at him, the corruption that was slowly poisoning his life force. It was worse than she had imagined, far more advanced than anyone realized. He had weeks at most, maybe less, and despite everything, despite his cruelty and contempt, the thought of feeling this bond snap as he died was unbearable. "Your Majesty," she began, but he cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Don't," he said, his voice hollow. "Don't call me that. Don't try to comfort me. Don't pretend that this changes anything. The mate bond is nothing but a cosmic joke, fate's way of ensuring that even the powerful can be brought low. I have spent my entire life proving that I am above such weaknesses, that I need no one, that love and connection are for the foolish and soft. And now the universe decides to bind me to an omega, to someone I was raised to view as less than nothing, to force me to feel pulled toward someone I have dedicated my existence to suppressing." He finally turned to look at her again, and the anguish in his eyes was almost worse than the hatred had been. "I will not accept this bond. I will reject you, properly and formally, as soon as I have the strength. And when I recover, if I recover, I will make sure you are sent far away where I never have to see you again and be reminded of this humiliation." The words should have destroyed her, should have sent her running in tears, but Arya found herself feeling something unexpected: pity. This man, this powerful king, was so terrified of vulnerability that he would rather die alone than accept help from someone he considered weak. He had built his entire identity on being untouchable, unbreakable, and now he was shattering. She pulled over a chair and sat down beside his bed, ignoring his glare. "You can reject the bond if that's what you want," she said calmly. "That's your right, and I won't fight you on it. But before you do, let me heal you. Not because we're mates, but because I'm a healer and you're dying. And I took an oath to help those in need regardless of who they are or how they treat me. After you're well, you can send me away and forget I ever existed. But please, let me do what I came here to do." Kyle stared at her for a long time, searching her face for deception, for manipulation, for any sign of the weakness he expected from an Omega. But Arya kept her expression open and honest, letting him see that she meant what she said, that she wasn't trying to trap him or claim him or force the bond. Finally, with a grunt of resignation, he lay back against the pillows. "Fine," he said shortly. "Do whatever it is you do. But understand this, Omega. I will never be soft with you. I will never pretend to feel things I don't. When you heal me, our business is concluded, and you will leave this palace and never return. Don't expect gratitude. Don't expect kindness. And certainly don't expect anything resembling affection. I am what I am, and I will not change for anyone, least of all a mate I never wanted." Arya nodded, pushing down the hurt his words caused and focusing instead on the work ahead. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the corruption pulse beneath her palms, and began to channel her gift. Her healing magic was different from traditional methods, where most healers simply accelerated natural recovery. Arya could see the actual threads of life force, could identify where they were damaged or corrupted, and could carefully untangle and repair them. It was delicate, exhausting work that required complete focus, and left her drained for days afterward. But as she worked on Kyle, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. The corruption wasn't a natural illness, or even an accidental curse. It was deliberate, carefully constructed, designed to kill slowly while mimicking natural decline. Someone had poisoned the king, someone with access to powerful dark magic and intimate knowledge of his physiology, someone who wanted him dead, but needed it to look like natural causes. She worked through the night, carefully extracting the poisonous threads from his life force, neutralizing them one by one. Kyle watched her in tense silence, his body rigid with discomfort, as she manipulated energies deep within him. Several times she felt him start to pull away, to reject the intimacy of her healing, but each time he forced himself to remain still, to allow it. As dawn broke through the windows, Arya finally pulled back, exhausted and shaking, her face pale with effort. "It's done," she whispered. "The immediate corruption is cleared. You'll start recovering your strength within hours. But Your Majesty, you need to know something. This wasn't natural. You were poisoned, deliberately and methodically, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't meant to kill you quickly. It was meant to weaken you slowly, to make you vulnerable, to make your death seem inevitable, so that when it finally came, no one would question it." Kale's expression had shifted as she spoke, the confusion and weakness giving way to cold, calculating fury. "Who?" he demanded, his voice already stronger than it had been hours before. "Who would dare? Who has the skill, the access, the audacity?" Arya shook her head tiredly. "I don't know, but the magic signature is unusual. Whoever did this has training in ancient dark arts, the kind that haven't been practiced openly in centuries. They also had to have regular access to you, close enough to renew the poison periodically. It's not a one-time curse. This has been maintained for months, maybe longer." The king's face had gone absolutely murderous, and Arya could practically see him mentally reviewing every person who had access to his chambers, every meal he had eaten, every drink he had consumed. Before she could say anything else, the massive doors burst open, and Dr. Marcus rushed in, followed by several council members. "Your Majesty," the physician exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "The reports are true. Your vitals are stabilizing. Your healing factor is returning." Whatever she did, it worked. The council members crowded around, their expressions mixtures of joy and calculation, already thinking about what this meant for the kingdom's stability, for their own positions of power. Kale endured their fawning for exactly 30 seconds before he silenced them with a raised hand. "Everyone out," he commanded. "I need to speak with my healer alone." The title, "My Healer," made Arya's wolf perk up hopefully, but she pushed the reaction down, reminding herself that it meant nothing, that he was simply being possessive in the way alphas were with anything they perceived as theirs. When they were alone again, Kale studied her with new intensity. "You said you were nobody," he said quietly. "Just an Omega nurse from a charity hospital. But the magic you just performed is rare, possibly unique. Where did you learn it? Who trained you?" Arya hesitated, then decided honesty was safer than deception with someone as perceptive as him. "I taught myself," she admitted. "I've always been able to see life force differently than others. When I was young, I would practice on injured animals, learning to sense and manipulate the threads. My parents thought I was just good with healing herbs. Never realized it was actual magic. When they died, I ended up at the charity hospital because it was the only place that would take in an orphaned Omega. I kept developing my gift in secret, using it to save patients that conventional medicine couldn't help. I never sought recognition because I knew that as an Omega, any unusual ability would make me a target. Powerful wolves don't like it when someone they consider inferior turns out to have gifts they lack. The bitter truth in..." Her words hung in the air between them. Kale's jaw tightened, and for a moment, something that might have been shame flickered across his features before he masked it. "You're right," he said finally. "I don't like it. I don't like that an Omega possesses magic that every healer in my court combined couldn't match. I don't like that you saved my life when I have spent years proclaiming that Omegas are weak and useless. I don't like that the mate bond has tied me to someone who challenges everything I've built my identity upon. But I'm not a fool. You just uncovered a plot to assassinate me, and your gift is clearly valuable beyond measure. So here is what's going to happen. You will remain at the palace as my personal healer. You will help me identify who poisoned me and ensure it doesn't happen again. You will teach your techniques to my court physicians so that they can protect against similar attacks. In return, I will ensure your safety, provide you with quarters and resources, and pay you handsomely for your services. But this is a professional arrangement, nothing more. The mate bond will remain unacknowledged. You will not expect anything from me beyond fair compensation for your work. Is that acceptable? It wasn't a request. Not really. But Arya found herself nodding anyway. The thought of returning to her tiny apartment and simple life seemed impossible now. She had been drawn into something far larger than herself. A conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power, and walking away would likely mean her death once the poisoners realized she had interfered. At least here, under the king's protection, she might survive long enough to see justice done. I accept, she said quietly, but I have one condition. Kale's eyebrows rose in surprise, clearly not used to having conditions imposed on him. I want your word that you'll actually investigate this assassination attempt seriously, she continued. I want you to promise that you won't just execute the first convenient suspect and call it solved. Someone with significant power and resources tried to kill you, and they're still out there. If we don't find them, they'll just try again. And next time, I might not be able to save you. The king regarded her steadily, and she saw a flicker of respect in those golden eyes. You have my word, he said. I will find who did this. And when I do, I will make them wish they had never been born. But you should know that this investigation will be dangerous. If someone was willing to poison me, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. By agreeing to help, you're painting a target on your back. Arya met his gaze without flinching. I painted a target on my back the moment I healed you, she pointed out. At least this way, I'll have some say in how we proceed. The corner of Kale's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile, though it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Over the following days, Arya settled into her new role as the king's personal healer, a position that came with both privileges and dangers she hadn't anticipated. She was given a suite of rooms adjacent to the royal quarters, beautiful chambers that were larger than the entire apartment building she had lived in before. The palace staff treated her with wary respect, uncertain how to classify someone who was simultaneously an Omega and under the king's direct protection. The court physicians were less welcoming, viewing her with suspicion and resentment, particularly when Kyle ordered them to learn from her techniques. But Arya focused on her work, carefully monitoring the king's recovery, while also beginning the delicate process of investigating his poisoning. She examined everything that had come in contact with him over the past months: his food, his water, his clothes, his bedding, even the air in his chambers. The breakthrough came when she tested his ceremonial crown, the ancient artifact he wore during official functions, and found traces of the same dark magic that had corrupted his life force. The crown was handled by only 3 people: the king himself, his personal attendant who had served him for 20 years, and the royal chamberlain who oversaw all ceremonial objects. Arya brought her findings to Kale during one of his recovery sessions, laying out the evidence carefully. The king's face had gone cold and hard as he processed the implications. Chamberlain Voss, he said quietly. He's been with the court for 15 years, came highly recommended from the Northern Territories. He has access to everything, knows every secret, controls who sees me and when. If anyone could orchestrate something like this, it would be him. But why? What would he gain from my death? Arya had been thinking about this, piecing together fragments of overheard conversations and political dynamics she was only beginning to understand. The Northern Territories have been pushing for greater autonomy, she said, slowly. They want to break away from the unified kingdom, return to the old ways where each region was independent. But you've refused. Maintained that unity is essential for peace. If you died without a clear heir, the kingdom would fracture. The Northern Territories could seize power in the chaos, maybe even claim the throne themselves. Kale nodded grimly, his strategic mind clearly racing through scenarios and contingencies. We need proof, he said. Suspicion isn't enough. If I move against Voss without evidence, I'll look paranoid and weak, especially given my recent illness. The other territories would use it as an excuse to challenge my authority. We need to catch him in the act, get a confession, or find documentation of his conspiracy. Arya bit her lip, knowing what she was about to suggest was dangerous but seeing no other option. I could offer to teach him my healing techniques, she proposed. Tell him that you've ordered me to share my knowledge with key members of court. If he's the one who poisoned you, he'll want to understand how I healed you so he can counter it in the future. I can use the teaching sessions to get close to him, maybe catch him off guard or find evidence in his chambers. Cale's eyes flashed with immediate rejection. Absolutely not, he growled. You're not trained for this kind of work. Voss is dangerous, and if he suspects you know anything, he'll kill you without hesitation. I won't allow it. The possessiveness in his tone made Arya's heart skip, but she forced herself to stay focused. You need someone he won't see as a threat, she argued. I'm an Omega. He'll underestimate me just like everyone else does. That gives me an advantage. Besides, what other options do we have? You can't exactly interrogate your Chamberlain without cause, and if we wait too long, he might try again or flee entirely. Cale looked like he wanted to argue further, but he clearly recognized the logic in her words. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he nodded. Fine, he conceded. But you don't do this alone. I'll have guards watching you at all times, and you'll report everything directly to me. At the first sign of danger, you extract yourself immediately. Your life is not worth this investigation. The words sent warmth through Arya's chest, despite her best efforts to remain unaffected. He might claim to feel nothing for her, might insist their bond meant nothing, but his actions told a different story. The teaching sessions began the next week, and Arya found herself face-to-face with Chamberlain Voss, a smooth-faced beta with cold eyes and an unsettling smile. He was charming and attentive, asking intelligent questions about her techniques, while subtly probing for information about how much she understood of the king's previous condition. Arya played her part carefully, acting like the naive Omega he expected, sharing information about healing magic while watching for any slip in his composure. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, please leave a comment below telling me what you think will happen. Will Arya be able to expose Voss, or will he discover her true intentions? Your theories and support keep this channel going. It was during the third session that Voss made his mistake. He asked a question about how to reverse certain types of corruption magic, phrased innocently as academic curiosity, but revealing knowledge he shouldn't possess unless he had created such magic himself. Arya's heart raced, but she kept her expression bland and answered as if she hadn't noticed the significance. After the session ended, she went straight to Cale with what she had learned. The king listened intently, his fury carefully controlled, and then made a decision that surprised her. We move tonight, he said. I'll confront him directly, force his hand. If he's guilty, he'll reveal himself. If he's innocent, we'll know to look elsewhere. But I won't have a traitor in my household another day. The confrontation took place in the throne room, with the full council present to witness. Cale, now recovered to his full terrifying strength, sat on his throne like a dark god of vengeance while guards dragged Chamberlain Voss before him. The king's voice was cold and absolute as he laid out the evidence. The poisoned crown, the specialized knowledge, the suspicious questions. Voss tried to maintain his innocence at first, protesting that he had been loyal for years, that this was all circumstantial. But when Cale revealed that Arya had been able to trace the specific magical signature back to practices unique to the Northern Territories, and that they had found correspondence in Voss's quarters discussing the timing of the king's expected death, the Chamberlain's mask finally cracked. You don't understand, Voss spat, his composure dissolving into desperate rage. You've destroyed everything the territory stood for. We were free, independent, strong in our diversity. You crushed us under your rule, forced us into a unity we never wanted, all while suppressing those you deemed weak. You built your kingdom on the backs of Omegas you treat like slaves, on the suffering of those without alpha blood. You're a tyrant, and I was trying to free us from your cruelty." The words hung in the air, and Arya saw several council members shift uncomfortably, clearly sympathizing with parts of Voss's argument, even if they couldn't condone his methods. Chaol's expression didn't change, but Arya felt something through their bond, a flicker of doubt, of pain quickly suppressed. "So you decided murder was the answer," Chaol said softly, dangerously. "You decided that your vision of freedom justified killing your king, plunging the kingdom into civil war, condemning thousands to die in the chaos that would follow my death. You speak of my cruelty while plotting an act that would have devastated millions. Tell me, Chamberlain, how many innocents were you willing to sacrifice? For your noble cause?" Voss had no answer to that, his righteous anger faltering in the face of the consequences he had conveniently ignored. Chaol pronounced sentence swiftly: "Exile to the farthest territories, stripped of all rank and title, forbidden from ever returning to the kingdom on pain of death." It was more merciful than Arya had expected, given the crime, and she wondered if Chaol was changing, even slightly, or if he simply wanted to avoid making Voss a martyr. In the aftermath of the confrontation, as the council dispersed and guards escorted Voss away, Arya found herself alone with Chaol in the throne room. The king sat heavily on his throne, looking suddenly exhausted despite his physical recovery. He spoke without looking at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "He wasn't entirely wrong, you know. About what I've built, how I've ruled. I have been cruel. I have suppressed Omegas, dismissed their worth, treated them as less than others. I justified it by saying I was creating order, ensuring the strong could protect the weak. But that was just a pretty lie to mask the truth that I was perpetuating suffering because it benefited me and those like me." The admission shocked Arya into silence. This was not a conversation she had expected from the proud, unbending king. Chaol finally turned to look at her, and there was something raw and uncertain in his eyes. "You make me question everything," he said quietly. "Every time I look at you, every time I feel this cursed bond pulling me toward you, I'm forced to confront the fact that I've spent my life dismissing people exactly like you as worthless. And you're not worthless. You saved my life. You uncovered a conspiracy my entire intelligence network missed. You've shown more courage and intelligence in a few weeks than most of my advisors have in years. And you're an Omega, the very designation I've built my entire worldview around despising. So either everything I've believed is wrong, or you're some kind of anomaly. And I don't think you're an anomaly. I think you're exactly what Omegas could be if we didn't systematically break them." The vulnerability in his words made Arya's throat tight with emotion. This was not a declaration of love, not even an acceptance of their bond. But it was something. It was growth, painful and reluctant, but real. She moved closer, standing before his throne, looking up at the powerful king who was finally allowing himself to doubt. "You're not giving yourself much credit," she said softly. "Most people never question their beliefs, especially when those beliefs benefit them. The fact that you're even willing to consider that you might be wrong is significant. But questioning isn't enough. If you really want to change, you have to act. You have to actually reform the systems that oppress Omegas, actually give them rights and protections, actually treat them as equals. Words and doubts don't mean anything without action." Chaol held her gaze for a long moment, and Arya saw the war raging inside him, the collision between everything he had been taught and everything he was starting to feel. Then he stood, towering over her, and extended his hand. "Help me," he said, and it sounded like a plea. "Teach me how to be different. I don't know how to do this. How to dismantle beliefs I've held my entire life. How to rule with compassion instead of fear. I don't even know if it's possible. But if you're willing to try, if you're willing to stand beside me and guide me through this, I'll make the attempt. I can't promise I'll succeed. I can't promise I won't fall back into old patterns. But I swear to you, on my life and my crown, that I will try." Arya stared at his outstretched hand, understanding the significance of what he was offering. This was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, asking an Omega for help, admitting he needed guidance. It went against every hierarchy, every tradition, every rule that governed their society. If anyone saw this moment, it would be considered scandalous, possibly even treasonous. But Arya also saw the genuine desire for change in his eyes, the painful hope that maybe he could be something better than what he had been. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, the mate bond singing with joy at the contact. "I'll help you," she said quietly, "but not because of the bond, and not because you're my king. I'll help you because I believe that people can change, that even someone who has caused tremendous harm can choose to do better. But you have to mean it, Kale. You can't just make surface changes to appease your conscience. You have to be willing to face everything you've done, to make real amends, to accept that some people will never forgive you. Are you ready for that?" His hand tightened around hers, and she saw steel enter his expression. The determination that had made him a legendary king now turned toward a different kind of conquest. "I'm ready," he said. "Show me how to be worthy of you." The words sent a shiver through Arya, equal parts fear and hope. She had asked for change, demanded justice, and now she had the opportunity to actually create it. But she also knew that transforming a king meant transforming a kingdom, and there would be resistance, danger, and no guarantee of success. Still, as she looked into Kale's golden eyes and saw genuine commitment there, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could actually do this. The reforms began slowly, carefully, with Kale consulting Arya on every decision. Their first act was to establish legal protections for Omegas, making it illegal to discriminate based on designation in employment, housing, or education. The announcement sent shockwaves through the kingdom, with traditionalist alphas protesting loudly that it violated natural hierarchy. Kale faced down their objections with the same iron will he had once used to suppress rebellion, making it clear that any attempts to circumvent the new laws would be met with severe consequences. But he also did something unprecedented. He listened to the concerns raised, acknowledged the fears of those worried about change, and worked to address them rather than simply crushing opposition. Arya watched him grow into this new role, saw him struggle with his instinct to dominate and control, saw him force himself to consider perspectives he had never valued before. The second reform was more personal and more radical. Kale announced that he was taking an Omega as his chosen mate, not just acknowledging the bond, but elevating Arya to the position of queen. The reaction was explosive. The court erupted in scandal, with several high-ranking alphas demanding that he reconsider, that he choose someone appropriate for his station. Even some Omegas were skeptical, seeing it as a publicity stunt rather than genuine acceptance. But Kale stood firm, and in a public ceremony that was broadcast across the kingdom, he did something no Alpha King had ever done. He knelt before Arya, in front of thousands of witnesses, and asked for her acceptance. Not commanded, not assumed, but asked, giving her the power to refuse him if she chose. Arya's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at this proud, complicated man who had tried so hard to break her spirit and was now humbling himself before her. She had every right to reject him, to punish him for the cruelty he had shown, for the years of suffering he had caused to people like her. But she also saw the journey he had taken, the genuine effort he was making to change, the real reforms he was implementing. She saw a future where Omegas could live without fear, where strength was measured by character rather than designation, where love could exist without dominance. And she saw a man who, despite all his flaws, was trying desperately to be worthy of the second chance she represented. "I accept," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Not because fate says we're mates, but because I choose you. I choose to believe in your capacity for change. I choose to stand beside you as we build something better together." The crowd's reaction was mixed, but as Kale rose and took her hand, Arya saw hope in the faces of the Omegas present, saw them daring to believe that their lives might actually improve. The ceremony concluded with Kale making a formal proclamation that sent even more shockwaves through the kingdom. He was establishing a council specifically for Omega representation, giving them a voice in governance for the first time in history. He was creating educational programs to help Omegas develop their skills and gifts without fear. He was personally funding shelters and support systems for those who had been abused under the old laws. And he was doing it all with Arya at his side, consulting her, learning from her, allowing her to shape policies that would affect millions. The months that followed were chaotic and challenging. There were attempts to undermine the reforms, conspiracies to remove both Kyle and Arya from power, and constant battles against those who preferred the old ways. But there were also victories. The first Omega counselor appointed, the first abuse case successfully prosecuted under the new laws, the first generation of Omega children who grew up knowing they had rights and protections. Arya worked tirelessly, using her platform as queen to advocate for the voiceless, to push Kyle when he faltered, to remind him why they were doing this when resistance seemed overwhelming. And Kyle, to his credit, never gave up. He faced every challenge with the same determination he had once used for conquest, now channeled toward justice. Their relationship evolved slowly, carefully, with both of them navigating the complexity of being mates who had started as enemies. The bond between them deepened not through magical compulsion, but through shared purpose and genuine respect. Kale learned to see Arya not as weak, but as possessing a different kind of strength, one that came from compassion and resilience rather than physical dominance. Arya learned to see past Kale's harsh exterior to the wounded man beneath, someone who had been raised in cruelty, and was only now discovering there was another way to live. They had their arguments, their setbacks, their moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, but they also had breakthroughs, small moments of connection that grew into something real and lasting. One night, nearly a year after Arya had first come to the palace, she found Kyle standing on the balcony overlooking the kingdom, his expression thoughtful. She joined him quietly, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city spread out before them. "I never thanked you," Kyle said eventually, his voice soft. "For saving my life, yes. But more than that, for not giving up on me when you had every reason to. For seeing potential in me that I didn't see in myself. For being strong enough to demand that I change, and patient enough to help me through it." Arya leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders, a gesture that had become natural over months of growing intimacy. "You did the hard part," she reminded him. "I just showed you the door. You're the one who chose to walk through it." Kyle turned to face her, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight, no longer cold but warm with genuine emotion. "I love you," he said simply, "not because of the mate bond, though I've learned to be grateful for it. I love you because you're brilliant and brave and stubborn and kind. I love you because you make me want to be better, to do better, to build a kingdom worthy of you. I love you because when I look at you, I don't see an Omega or a queen, or even my mate. I see Arya, the woman who stood up to a dying king and demanded he be worthy of saving, the woman who believed in change when no one else did, the woman who made me kneel, not through force but through the sheer power of her conviction." Tears streamed down Arya's face as she listened to his words, hearing the truth in them, feeling the depth of emotion through their bond. "I love you too," she whispered, "even though you were cruel, even though you hurt people like me for years. I love you because you chose to change, because you faced your mistakes instead of hiding from them, because you're building something beautiful out of the ashes of something terrible. And I'm proud of you, Kale. I'm proud of the king you're becoming." Kale kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Arya felt the last walls between them crumble. This was not the forced proximity of a mate bond or the obligation of royal duty. This was a choice, made freely by two people who had fought their way to understanding and come out stronger together. The kingdom continued to transform. 5 years after the initial reforms, Omega literacy rates had tripled. 10 years later, the first Omega held a position on the High Council. 20 years later, designation-based discrimination had decreased by 70%. and a new generation was growing up in a society where Omegas could dream beyond survival. Kale and Arya ruled together, partners in every sense, their bond no longer a source of shame, but a symbol of what was possible when pride gave way to compassion. They had children who grew up understanding that strength came in many forms, that leadership meant service rather than domination, that love was always stronger than fear. There were still challenges, still those who clung to the old ways, still moments when Kyle struggled with instincts bred into him over generations. But Arya was always there to remind him of how far they had come, to celebrate the victories and strategize through the setbacks. And Kale never stopped working to be worthy of her, never stopped pushing himself to be better, to do better, to create a legacy of justice rather than conquest. The cruel king who had once tried to break her spirit had learned to kneel in the ways that mattered most, to truth, to justice, to love, and in doing so, he had risen higher than he ever had through dominance alone. In the grand throne room where Kyle had once pronounced judgment with cold authority, there now hung a portrait commissioned by the king himself. It showed two figures, a powerful alpha kneeling before an omega, offering her a crown. But if you looked closely, you could see that the omega was simultaneously lifting the alpha to his feet, their hands joined in partnership. Beneath the portrait was an inscription that had become the motto of the new era. True strength is found not in breaking spirits, but in lifting them. Signed by both King Kale and Queen Arya, it served as a reminder to every ruler who came after of the revolution that had begun when one omega refused to be broken and one king finally learned to bend. And as Arya stood beside her mate, watching their children play in gardens that were now open to wolves of all designations, she reflected on the journey they had taken. She had come to the palace expecting to heal a dying king and leave. Instead, she had healed a dying kingdom and found home. Kale had expected to reject his omega mate and continue ruling through fear. Instead, he had accepted her and learned to rule through love. Neither of them had wanted the mate bond, but both had chosen to honor it, through action rather than just accepting it through fate. And that choice, renewed every day, had changed everything. The sun set over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Arya knew that there would be new challenges tomorrow, new battles to fight for justice and equality. But she also knew that she wouldn't face them alone. She had a partner who had proven himself willing to change, a people who were learning to hope, and a future that looked brighter than anyone had dared imagine. The Alpha King had tried to break her spirit, but instead, she had made him kneel to something greater than himself. And in that kneeling, both of them had finally learned to rise,